How you doing? Who I am is not important, but what I have to say is important. Now, the past few weeks, I covered physical health and sexual education, and I mentioned many times throughout the videos that it was the most simplistic health because physical health is something that we could statistically observe, utilizing other senses including our sight and our hearing. For example, we could physically see if someone is out of shape. Now, you've also perhaps heard me say many times the word of social construct when I was referring to things that didn't have to do with objective information. Now, the question that's formulated from that is, what exactly is a social construct? Well, a social construct is the complexity that we as a society formulate out of simplicity of the world. You see, the world is a lot more simplistic and basic than we make it out to be. In fact, we actually give a lot of meanings and purpose in a lot of things that we do as a society and as people through our ideologies, our religious beliefs, our subjective opinions, and various other things. It's what gives society the moral code that it has, which is good versus evil. You see, society functions on the moral code that is good versus evil to craft its laws and to craft the balance that is maintaining humanity's mental capacity. A balance, if you will. A balance that will alter society's perceptions of a lot of things depending on how humanity's mental state, specifically in America, how the state of people are. You see, every time society has an ideology, it has to formulate that ideology and focus on that ideology to keep humanity afloat. And every time humanity starts to crumble in terms of its mental state, then society makes a change in the ideologies or switches some laws and crafts new ones or perhaps go back to old ones in order to regain the mental capacity and the mental states of people to a more neutral and stabilized state. For example, if a specific political party, whether it be left or right, was to propagate a message that a majority of people are desiring and really want, then obviously that political party is likely to be the one to end up winning and being in charge of society. Because if people were seeing a harm to society as a whole with a specific ideology going on in current times, then they are going to switch the gear to the other political party so that society can once again stabilize. It's a pendulum that keeps swinging back and forth to maintain stabilization. When an ideology is starting to become more of a detriment than a benefit to society as a whole, they are going to switch every time. You see, society is always going to be geared towards helping as many people as possible and being more of a benefit as much as possible than a detriment to most people. Because it's with that function, with that balance, that we can coexist as best as we can and function in life and have the best life that we can possibly have with that balance. So every time there's going to be a swing and change of things where it's becoming more of a detriment, society is always going to make it more of a benefit to benefit us as people. Because society as a whole is not a single person. Society is everyone, and society functions in helping as much people as possible. Now, this is not a guarantee that you are going to be helped in society, because society functions that if you help in return, you will get help. It's kind of like earning your respect and earning your placement to be able to stay within it. But of course, this is the functioning of how it works that makes a lot of people turn away from society as a whole as well. Because some people personally believe that they may not be able to make it into society, whilst others may personally believe that society has a hit on them and is always out to get them. Is always out to put them down specifically. In fact, this has actually created one of the big movements going on in today's day and age known as men goes their own way. And essentially what it is that men feel like society has been treating them like shit, or they have essentially become invisible to society and not being able to help. And essentially they feel like they are the punching bags of society as a whole, and so they've created a kind of movement of their own where they step away from society and do their own thing. Albeit this movement is not just restricted to men, because women could also do it as well. It's more so specifically garnered towards men, because men tend to be statistically the ones that are suffering the most from society on a basis of what we've been able to take data of how people feel towards society, how they feel like society feels towards them. Albeit things are not exactly as black and white as they actually seem. nor are they as colorful as they actually seem. In fact, it could be either or, both, or neither at the same time, because it's all about a perspective and a perception of the mind and how one perceives society to be towards them and what they perceive of society as a whole. For example, think of society as like a rock that doesn't move, but every time the water flows on one side, it pushes the rock just enough to lean towards one, and then when the water pours on that side, it pours the rock right back to the other side. And it does that back and forth. But the rock itself is always just the objective thing that stays there. It is the reality. It is the thing that is always going to be stationary. And then, of course, you have the people that are going to be in those waters, that be swimming around, and essentially get to perceive of what they make out this rock to be. Make their own perspectives of how this rock is. And this is where social constructs are formulated from. You see, for the social construct to exist, you as an individual have to believe it exists. You as an individual have to perceive it to exist. And the more people that believe it, the more people that perceive it, the more that construct becomes mainstream in society, and that is the construct that society is going to gear towards and push upwards. Because to most people, it is a benefit to them for believing in that construct. Since they believe it exists, it helps them keep afloat, and it doesn't make them feel depressed, nor does it make them feel anxious or worried about their purpose or their meaning. In fact, that's how purpose and meaning function, because when you create your purpose and when you create a meaning, it becomes the thing that motivates you to keep going. And as long as you're still going, you're capable of being able to help in society, or you are capable of at least being an influence in some way by just existing. You may not know it, but your mere existence may be influential to pretty much anybody that perceives it to be. You see, leadership and influence could be in anyone. It could be anyone. It could be from whatever job. You could be a plumber and somebody can find that influential because it's all about the perspective. And that perspective is to believe that what that person does and the way that they do it is the best way for that person as well. And they feel like that is uplifting for them, because when they see you do it, they feel like, okay, I can do it, and I could be in the best state possible. I could be in my best shape, best mindset imaginable. Unfortunately, it also works the other way as well, and people can find what you do to be terrible and absolutely horrible and pretty much irredeemable, and they'll find it disgusting, and they'll find it mortifying, and they will want nothing to do with you, or they will want you to be exiled, or you to die, or for you to just not be anywhere near that individual. And this is what I mean by society functioning on the basis of good versus evil. It is a construct that is formulated to create a moral code for society as a whole, for us to be able to determine what is right and wrong in terms of what we feel and what we perceive to be the best things for society and the worst things for society. For example, murder. In the grand scheme of things, murder is something that is just existing. It is something that people and organisms do in order to survive. You kill something and you may consume it, or you may kill for sport. That is something that just is. Like I said, you know how society is a rock? Let's say that murder is also that rock. But we as people, as a society, we see that if you murder someone, you are taking away a life that could be existing in the society. You are essentially a harm to society by taking people out of society, by stripping away the life that they have. And so society will look at that rock and will put that rock and put a label on that rock and say that rock is bad. And that is where the moral code of, okay, murder is a no-go. You are going to get arrested or murdered yourself if you commit the act of murder. And that is how society essentially bases its moral codes and its laws. It bases it around, okay, what benefits society? What can help society as a whole? And what is a detriment? Anything that could be a detriment to society as a whole will be prosecuted or banned or will be forbidden from society's door. Because society is, like I said, is the rock that is supposed to be the basis for whatever helps and benefits people. But this goes back to my point from earlier and how an individual may feel like society is going against them. Because per se that the good versus evil label that society puts onto something that you may perhaps like as an individual, then you may feel like you are the villain of their story. And this, of course, then affects behavior, which is something that I wanted to discuss in this video, is behavior. You see, it's because of the behavior of an individual is what ultimately manifests the constructs to begin with. The social constructs exist because of an individual's behavior, and that individual's behavior in the viewpoint and the perspective of a majority of people versus a minority of individuals. And ultimately, the behavior then may alter to be purposefully detrimental or negative towards society as a whole, which of course will have to force society to up their stakes into what can be acceptable and what cannot be acceptable. A great example of this in America would be the law of freedom of speech. You see, you as an individual, you are allowed to say anything that you want, any single word at any time, because you are capable of doing so. However, that law has not always been taken into fruition because certain usages of words can be perceived to be a lot more negative in the majority of people's eyes than for some people. This, of course, eventually forces society to have to ban or forbid certain words to be used. Even with the law of freedom of speech, they have to be more strict because of how people as a majority feel and perceive what someone may say or how they may say it. And this is what I mean by we as individuals making things a lot more complex than they actually are, because in actuality what words are just sounds that are coming out of our mouths. You see, we make sounds as a form of communication. However, the certain communication methods and words that we may say or we may do may seem like it is trying to harm an individual, and this of course creates the perception and the perspective that the harm is intentional and is trying to harm a category of people rather than just one individual. This of course creates various social construct belief systems that go from racism to misogyny to misogynist and various other social constructs where the battle of what's good and what's bad doesn't have a clear answer because of how things are utilized and because of how the behavior of the individuals involved are handling it. I'm going to give you a few examples to display what I mean by the perspectives being altered depending on how you perceive them. I'm going to give you a few examples of what I mean by the perceptions may vary in various different ways depending on how the viewpoint is of good and evil. Here we have a group of people looking up to one individual. Here we have a business functioning based around society. And here we have a group of friends. Now, if we were to take the good perspective, this group of people looking up to this one person are individuals who are inspired by this person, who are in their eyes a leader. For this business, they are functioning their business to make everybody money, everybody profit, so that they can all live their lives. And this group of friends right here have each other's back and will be willing to do anything for each other and always be there for each other, even when there is conflict. Now, what would the negative or the evil viewpoints of these three things be? Well, this group of people looking up to this one individual would be a cult. This business would be corporative, always functioning towards society, and that may be a detriment to certain individuals. This could be potentially a mafia. And this group of friends right here could be doing criminal acts and a bunch of other chaotic things. That could be called a gang. But on a perspective-wise basis, the individuals in question each have their own reasons as to why they may want to do something. The group of individuals may have a reason as to why they look up to that person. The business may have a reason as to why they do what they do to make money. And these group of friends may have a reason as to why they always are there for each other and always have each other's back and may be aggressive towards people who don't feel the same way. On a perspective basis, any individual and any person can perceive anything to be either good or evil. It could be both. At the same time, it could be neither. because maybe you don't believe in good or evil, and maybe this whole thing is perhaps just nonsense. And this is something I wanted to talk about in regards to the spiritual health video. But the point still stands that society will always be functioning towards the beneficial of a majority of people. So whatever the perspective is, if a majority of people see the same perspective, that's the perspective that's going to be celebrated the most in society. Whereas the other perspective that is not as supported or has minimal amount of people will be the evil concept in their eyes. Another example I could give to you is when it comes to the rich and the poor. You see, when you're rich, you are expected by society to be able to lend the money that you have to benefit other people who may not be able to gain money like you. But if you don't do so, then to society, you are essentially going against their needs, and so you are going to be seen as evil or as bad. However, that could also be a two-way street, because let's say if you were poor, and then you hit the jackpot and got millions of money, now, even though you were just poor, you now are expected to hand over some of the money that you won from your jackpot to the poor in return. Since you were there, you would be understanding of the fact that you would be able to give money in return. Because, like I said, society is always going to function towards people in a beneficial way. The majority of people that are benefiting is what society is always going to be geared towards. Even if you were a poor person, yet you are probably the most despicable individual because you've done so many things in your personal life to literally deserve to be poor and homeless, society as a whole is still going to try and propagate people to try and give you money because you're homeless. And society doesn't want people to suffer and to die. That's why even people in prison and jail still get food and still get exercises and activities to do, so that way they don't just straight up die. The only time they would offer a death penalty is if somebody was to harm, as in kill, multiple individuals. Then the death penalty will be issued as a form of being able to be rid of a detriment to society, as in this person may not stop or may never stop trying to kill people, and so we need to kill them to take them out and make sure that no one else gets murdered. Society's function may also cause some people to engage in peer pressure and feel like they are pressured to always be having to do what society tells them and never being able to do what they want to do. For example, a good example of what peer pressure would be like is that if this equation, which is 5 minus 3, which the answer is 2, and you know that the answer is 2 because it's obvious, but the entire class was to say it's only 1, and they were to really hammer you and say that, oh, you're an idiot if you say that it's 2, then some people may conform to the mindset that, oh, the answer has to be 1, because they don't want to feel pressured by the individuals around them. They don't want to engage in conflict, and they just don't want to feel like they are an idiot. And so they will say 1, but in actuality, they are wrong, and the entire class is wrong because the answer is actually 2. And the reason why people do this is something that I want to indulge in with like the emotional health video and the spiritual health videos, specifically because there is a lot of conversation in terms of how someone feels and how someone perceives things on a more personal level that results in the behavior of certain individuals and results in a group of individuals' behavior towards other people or single individuals or categories and all that showbiz. However, for next week, I want to exclusively discuss communication, because communication is probably the biggest part of society as a whole, because without communication, society or anybody else would never know what you are perceiving or what you are feeling internally and how that may be affecting you as an individual, because for all you know, maybe a majority of people are also going through it but have never had the courage nor the bravery to be able to speak up about it. And this, of course, could lead to a shift in how society view things and how society functions. So I think that would be a great video to be talking about exclusively. So if you are willing to hear about that, I suggest checking for next week's video. And I will see you next week in class.